Ribby, 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 ribby. Ah, Sizola, Sizola la bede. Siola, Siola la bede.
Litzwe Mbotho, my love.
Nobody's got what you got, and that's absolute truth. See your intellect, nobody could rival, and that's how you broke out of the cycle, yeah. Baby, it's the way you...
What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode on Vlog Vibes. Today, the title of this episode is called Own Your Own Stride. And I really wanted to do a video that just dove into the epitome of myself and broke down the values of who I am and what I stand for, what has cultivated me to this point, and just talking on topics that govern the ecosystem of myself. The structure. So I'll be talking about leadership, what I stand for. I'll be talking about greatness. I'll be talking about self-mastery. I will also be talking about my family dynamics in that order, and just expand upon that and just give persons a vantage, a truthful and transparent vantage into myself along this journey of building my businesses and building my personal brand. And I think it's a very important thing for me in order to connect, especially on this foundational level. So there's this grounding and understanding in what I'm trying to do and what I'm looking to create. And so let's just dive straight into it. Okay, so first and foremost, leadership. So what does leadership mean to me? And as a leader, how do I interpret that in my day-to-day dealings, my life? And from my personal experience, what does that equate to? So I'd like to quote my mother. She said to me that, "My boy, you're gonna have to lead by example. You will have to lead by example." Adding on to that, leadership is also having power, but knowing how to facilitate that power, knowing how to distribute it. And for me as an individual, I feel as if my leadership role and me being a leader, I exude my power through compassion, through kindness, through understanding. Because I feel as if every individual, we all have this identity and this ego that we attach to that defines who we are. And there's certain things that if external circumstances and stimulus collide with what we have created and what we understand to be who and what we are, we get offended, right? So leadership as well for me is a dimension of understanding that whatever exists externally and how external environment reacts has absolutely nothing to do with me or my value as a person, or my attack on my character, but rather, especially when dealing with human beings, it is a relationship that human being is having with themselves. And with that understanding, over time, you will eventually cease to respond because you know the truth of what is happening externally. Furthermore, leadership to me is completely diminishing non-existence of the ego. And I can't stress this more. In terms of leadership, if you're looking to grow and progress at such a phenomenal rate and a high performance standard, especially on a macro level, there is no time for ego. There's no time for that at all. You cannot exist, you cannot identify yourself within that separate identified self. It cannot exist. So I think for me, it was a process. That ego completely, I did everything that I could, and I made sure that I had to diminish that and completely erode that to non-existence, negligible. And once that was eradicated, I was able to completely progress at a phenomenal and astounding rate on a day-to-day basis. So much so that when I complete my end of my day, and if I go back a day before or the day before, I'll look back and I'll be like, how much have I accomplished in the space of 2 days, right? When 2 years ago, I probably wouldn't have been able to accomplish what I did in 2 days in about 4 or 5 months, even a year. So that's what I have to say in terms of leadership. Okay, so what I stand for. See, when persons are looking to go on a personal growth journey, looking to find themselves, what is the most important thing to suss out and understand is for one to stand for something. What is it that one stands for? Your values, your morality, efficacy, all of these things one has to through discrimination, figure out what is it that actually makes up who I am. The defining, the source of what makes me tick. So what I stand for, my values, which is also up on my website, litzwembotho.com, and it depicts, and it was very intentional to talk and display who and what I stand for and my journey first and foremost, so persons can see whether the way in which I conduct myself will align with whoever wants to work with me, right? And that was the intention of that. So you can suss out exactly, okay, this is what this person stands for. This is the personal brand. This is the filtration and the exponentiality of everything that he stands for. So everything that he touches is going to be a manifestation of these values and what he stands for. So what I stand for: diversity, simplicity, sustainability, eco-friendliness, social transformation, creative expression, thought leadership, inclusion, quality of life, Pan-Africanism. And these are the things that that make me who I am. So everything that I do, I come back to my values and understand and vet everything that I go forth and everything that I want to venture into. This is how I determine, how I move forward, because it's not a matter of profitability. It's not a matter of all of these things. There's more to existence than what the baby boomers defined as a success. Now, this day and age, our generation, the young generation, is more informed, more conscious, and it's a responsibility for persons such as ourselves to make sure that we align and create and manifest, create value and be in service of all things humanity and Mother Nature. So ESG, like ESG investing, conscious investing, environment, social and governance is something when I look to move forward, that is how I evaluate everything first and foremost. That is the standard, and then only the other things follow. So yeah, that's just what I stand for. So greatness. This is a major topic. Greatness, greatness, greatness. What does it mean to be great? How can one accomplish greatness? I made a decision. I made a decision that I, Litzwe Mbotho, would be great. I made a decision, a personal decision, that I am accountable for. Only me. That I am going on a path of greatness. I have to define what that means for me. All right. And once I made that decision, I started to understand and started to think, how can I be great? What is it that I need to do? And through a process of elimination, over time I was able to refine and get to the source of how I could become great and function at such a high optimum level that it was incomparable to any human being, right? Or any standard. And I had to cultivate my environment in order to manifest that way of being. So one of the things that made me understand or made me realize my greatness is what I had to take a complete holistic view on my mental health journey, being diagnosed with schizophrenia and psychosis. And I really had to do so much introspection and get sources of information and analyze and draw upon a thesis and a conclusion of what I could do in order to assist myself in that regard. So I came to a conclusion that mental health is also a result of a stimulus, right? A certain type of stimulus, environmental stimulus, right? That is a manifestation of the cognitive and the psychological limitation that exist within one's mind. So in essence, your potential, your intellect, what happens is that your neurological pathways are opened and are completely opened dramatically through this unhealthy manifestation. So the pathway, the intellect pathway is opened up, but it's just filled with soot, calamity, and mud. So essentially what I did was I got all that information and understood what was happening, and I cleansed those neurological pathways and I made sure that they were clean and completely pristine. So now that what is flowing through these pathways is absolute divinity and channeling of complete infinite consciousness, bliss and intellect and genius, right? And that is how I switched my narrative and saw that actually this is a superpower, right? The only reason why I was acting out in this way, only reason why I had such manifestations of mental health was because I was actually a genius, right? I was actually highly intelligible. And what was happening is there were limitations and scriptings that I was taught, whether it be my environment, but mostly psychological and within a family construct that made me exist in that way. And I had to find a way to change that environment and that response in order for me to get the desired outcome. So it was the input and then the outcome. So more to the point, just expanding upon that, I've come to the point of greatness where I no longer function on a micro level, on an individual level, where it's this individual and that individual. It's within duality, not so much duality, because I have to talk in a dualistic mode of conversation. I can't talk about non-dual ideology, because that in itself is a completely different philosophy and concept that is not necessarily easily grasped by persons who have not taken that path of understanding and of the cosmos and infinite consciousness, divinity, God, whatever you want to call it. So when I say I do not function on an individualistic, I do not function on a individual frequency, I mean that I do not function on an emotional level, when dealing and when moving forward, there's an identity, right? So it's just a very macro way of looking at things, such as I use tenets, I use empirical data, the law of averages, and that type of research to make decisions, as opposed to the emotional fluctuity of my various states. And I use that in order to make decisions rather than incarnating myself into a limited form and getting identified as this limited form of totality and acting out in that way. And with that understanding and with that perspective, I'm able to move at a phenomenal rate, because it's no longer a comparison, it's just internal, it's self-mastery. And expanding upon self-mastery, once you have the ability to master yourself psychologically, from the spiritual level, which always starts with spiritual level, then it goes to the mind, then to the body. That's how the filtration system of self-mastery begins. Once you've mastered yourself, you've mastered everyone else. Because 90% of humanity have not been able to master themselves, right? And mastery is from the spiritual level, the connection between the separate self, whether it be the Atman or the waking state, and the infinite consciousness connection of bliss, of eternal state, divinity that allows you to be complete totality as is, playing out continuously, non-endingly. And when I say mastering others, as I said, 90% of persons don't master themselves. Once you master yourself, you literally are able to create your reality, because it's not a matter of external influencing internal, it's internal influencing external. Therefore, you will always be the one who's at the helm of the control panel, right? Because you understand that it's self that needs to be disciplined, that needs to be controlled, not external. It's your response, your reaction to the external that needs to be mastered. Because the external is a result, is external, but the internal is your choice, right? And once you have that, and you have that ability, and you cultivate an environment that attributes to the mastery of yourself, there's infinite possibilities. So I want to just give an analogy. I was watching a video, Scooter Braun, Justin Bieber's manager, and he was giving an analogy of the type of being that he was. So he gave an analogy, a baseball analogy, of how there's spectators, okay, and then there's the person who's on the pitch who's swinging. Right, and he's talking about the person is, of course, is the person who's trying to achieve or do something with their life, in whichever way and form. And then, of course, there's a person throwing the ball, and then there's his teammates. And he said that there's persons who come onto the pitch and swing once and they miss, and the crowd boos them, and that person hangs their head down in shame and then walks off. And then there's that person who swings and misses 10 times, and while he's swinging and missing 10 times, the crowd is booing, and it eventually gets to him, and he walks off. And then there's a person who swings and who's not so much driven by the crowd, but he's swinging and he's looking to his teammates for validation, or a construct that he wants to get validated from. And as a result, he's not able to swing and actually focus on the process of hitting the ball. And then there's the maverick, who is, in this analogy, Scooter Braun, who talks about, is that person who continuously swings. People, the people in the stands will boo, will say, give someone else a chance, or leave, you shouldn't be here, all of these things. But he keeps swinging. He's not focused on anything else. He just keeps swinging. And in the process of swinging, he's like, okay, I swung. Okay, this is the angle that I swung at. Okay, I need to shift my position. So every time he swings, he's getting better and better and better. So he's actually getting better and better and better and better and better at his craft, right? And then when eventually the ball comes and he smacks the ball after the 100th and 20th try, and it goes out of the stadium and everybody cheers. And after that, he keeps on hitting these shots outside of the stadium. Now everybody's cheering him. He goes for the home run, his teammates, everybody, and he's the master of his craft. So the moral of the story is, you keep swinging and get better and better and better. Eventually there will come a time of exponentiality where, because of your refinement, you have honed yourself and you have cultivated a way of being and a routine that has allowed you to extract the best of yourself. So when that switch happens, it will just be completely astronomical. And what he also said as well was, nobody cares about what happened during that time. The spectators completely forget that he swung 120 times. They just say, oh no, he deserved it. He really deserved it. He worked hard, right? Nobody remembers. And that completely blew my mind. I was like, oh gosh, it makes so much sense. And to a certain extent, that has happened in my life. Right, on a much smaller scale, a micro scale. And then I understood the process. And I was like, that analogy completely makes sense. So finally, I'd like to talk about family dynamics and talk about what it is that has made me who I am. So I think, touching on earlier on about how it was the psychology and the manifestation of, the limitations that were ingrained in my psyche through family dynamics. So for me, on a family level, my family has never struggled per se with funds or money. We've always had enough. My family has some degree of wealth and portfolio, but that wasn't enough to sustain the holistic human being. What was missing for me was the family structure. So there were funds coming in, but there was no a mirror of an upstanding human being or together human being. So there was a psychologically dysfunctional environment that I was existing in. So from a very early age, I found myself being a ventriloquist to my mother, who I still encourage and say, you're a monarch, you're a monarch, you have to, just to give that encouragement, because the tides have completely changed now. And I'm no longer, that kid, that needed some sort of guidance or help. And from an early age, my mother has suffered from, mental health and all of these things since my mother and my father got a divorce when I was 12. And she's never been able to recover since then. And other things, really, really horrible things happened during that time to her. And she wasn't ever able to let go and recover. As a result, there were unhealthy manifestations. Even though her family had a history and a track record of mental health, her brother, her brain damaged mother as well. And that line, it was it really affected the complete construct of our family, because my father was no longer, he was in our lives, but that man and that fatherly figure, there was a gap, as well in that regard. It was just myself, my younger brother, and my mother. Right, so through that degradation, my mother wasn't able to sustain the family business for a long time, and at a very young age I had to be that ventriloquist, trying to put things together without actually getting any form of compensation. And it took such a toll on me, especially during high school, because I was completely stressed, because I understood that she was incapable of doing this. And I knew what needed to be done even at that time, but she was unable to do that because of the limitation, the psychological, health problems that she was dealing with. And she hasn't been able to recover. And as a result, I most recently, I made a switch in my perspective. And I saw that as an opportunity. And I realized all of that psychological suffering, that verbal abuse, all of these things that were experienced, even though she did the best that she could, and she didn't know what she was doing because she was unaware of herself. She didn't have the self-mastery or the tools or the information to understand the extent and what she was doing to herself and to her family and to her kids. So it turns out that, I saw that as an opportunity to say, I have experienced that, which means that I know how to do this, that, and the other. But there was a limited identity that I was functioning off of that wasn't allowing me to ascend. And then I had to shatter the identity, and I had to shatter, the role model figures of my mother and my father, because to be very honest, they did the best that they could, but they weren't great role models of who I wanted to be and what I wanted to accomplish. And a couple of years ago, I managed to shatter that. But as a result of that, there was a lot of bitterness and really despise, and it wasn't great energy. It was more from a place of hatred. I had gotten to a point in my life where I was beyond these beings in my life, and it was an unhealthy way of seeing things. And then I shifted my perspective, and I realized, no, generations of generations have been able to position myself, my family to this point so that I could have an opportunity in this way, in this environment, in order to achieve and to create more for persons that look like me and for the greater population of African people, and just to be in service of humanity and what I stand for. And saying that was an experience, that was a period. I went through extreme amount of psychological suffering that's incomparable, to the point where I had to use Michelin star knives 13 times. I had to stab myself and bleed out for 6 hours to subside the pain. Can you imagine a person stabbing themselves like this in the neck and not feeling anything and bleeding out pools of blood on the floor and somehow managing to survive? That was my reality. And then from there, it was such a rigorous journey to recovering. I never knew that I would be where I am today on a mental state. So that was basically the family dynamics that kind of attributed me to who I am today. And, I'm in a position where now I am, the person who is foreseeing over the portfolio, foreseeing over the family business. I'm in this position. I've come into it. I've realized who I am. I'm no longer limited to the identity and the ideas that I had of myself through exposure to external environment and narrative that were propagated externally. And I realized that I wasn't there. There was an idea of what something was and what something that persons not in these positions assumed what a certain way of being should be like. And then I had to reconnect and reevaluate and understand and come back to myself and accept and have the gratitude and move from that place of truth, understanding, gratefulness, and amplifying that of what has been given, to be in the service. So that's basically what it was for me, man. So I think I've completely covered everything. So finally, I just wanted to say that there's a lot of things that are in the works. I'm really excited, especially for Reality Shift, and also my personal brand, and things that are going to be sprouting out of both babies that are being nurtured, or being watered. Yeah, man, I'm really excited. I just really wanted to disclose completely about myself and what I stand for, who I am, what I've been through, so persons can form a bond. You guys can form a bond with me in that regard and understand my journey and the transparency that I have as I'm moving forward, and just connecting with self and persons. And I really just wanted to be an open book and really connect with persons and lay a foundation of just being a human being, just being able to connect with every being, whatever way and form, and just being there to assist. So yeah, please do look out and just, root for me out loud, root for me in silence, or don't root for me at all. But I really I'm grateful, for just being able to just do that of which I love, and to help persons in the process, to create value, and above all, to be in service of humanity and Mother Nature. Cheers.